Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Toast to the Art Show. Today we welcome back Victoria Chick. She's a contemporary figurative artist and early 19th, 20th century print collector, and she's based in beautiful Silver City, New Mexico, which is an awesome art community to go and visit. And while you're visiting, you should visit Victoria's website and her studio. Go to victoriachick.com. She's on our show every third Saturday talking about art history, and also Southwest New Mexico, where she's based. So welcome back to the show. How are you, Victoria?
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I'm very well today.
Good.
More rain.
Oh, good. Rain is always good for the desert region and high desert and mountains, and basically the Southwest needs it. So I'm really glad to hear that about rain. Also, Victoria has also founded the start of the Southwest Regional Museum of Art and Art Center. This is another part of what we always talk about with her. And how are things going with the museum?
Well, they're moving along.
Cool.
We're in a mode right now where we are doing a lot of planning for the next step. So which will be fundraising. So this is, we're taking our time with this.
Yeah, and fundraising to actually get this building in
Right.
in downtown Silver City, which would be right next to the museum, which is a beautiful museum. So that would be really cool. Okay,
Yes,
but
it
today,
makes sense.
yeah.
In the meantime, we keep getting wonderful pieces of art. So we are
Awesome.
I know. I'm running out of storage space.
That's a
Wow.
good problem to have. I like
Yeah,
that.
that's awesome though.
Yeah.
That's so you're going to have revolving exhibits then.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah.
Cool.
We're going to have, we're envisioning 3 different galleries within the museum itself, and each month one of those galleries will be a new exhibit. So
Oh, awesome.
there's always something new to see, and then people will get a chance to continue seeing the things that they have learned to love, and so we hope there's something exciting there all the time for people.
Nice.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool.
Well, today we're
That's
excited because
exciting.
we're going to go to the 17th century. We have this series of, history of ships that's been happening lately, all on its own. We've got a great article by Glenn Burrows up on blendradioandtv.com, all about the historic ships of England. We have 2 authors in their books talking about true mutinies that happened aboard ships. I mean, pirating and mutinies, and it's some crazy stories, but all true history. And so we're going to be doing a nice feature in our upcoming brand new magazine called Way Back When History. It goes with our Way Back When History radio show we've been doing for years. And then we were talking with Victoria on the last show, and she's like, yeah, we could do ships in paintings and art. And so she went right to the Dutch. Why the Dutch? Why did you pick on the Dutch?
Well, I think the Dutch had so many painters, that recorded ships. So there's so much material out there. The 17th century was like the golden age of Dutch shipping. It was an important time for a lot of countries, but the Dutch kind of got a head start, I would say, because they were a water not bound exactly, but water loving kinds of people. They lived on an estuary, most of them, and so they always loved fishing. They always loved being in the water. They have Amsterdam is full of canals, which a lot of people think of Venice as a canal city, but Amsterdam certainly ranks right up there with as many canals. So they were water born kind of people, and then something magical happened in the 17th century to make painting like a common really high level activity in Holland and in the Low Countries particularly, but Holland especially with shipping. And I don't know why this happened. It seems like certain centuries are marked by an increase in science, or 18th century, an increase in music. In 17th century, it was visual art. And so that there were so many wonderful artists operating in the Dutch area at that time. The Flemish artists, the area that's now Belgium, on up to the Netherlands, which had a number of provinces, but the main one was Holland. That it kind of gets labeled. Everything kind of gets labeled as being Holland or being Dutch, but generally speaking, it was the Low Countries.
It's interesting too, in your article, and everyone, Victoria's article on this, you can see some of the paintings too, is up on blendradioandtv.com. Just type in Victoria and Dutch and you'll find it there in the search box. And she's also got her section in the expert department. You can see her there. But you talk about this being the art of pride. So the Dutch were doing really well. Like, they were industrious, and it seemed, they were very much a free society.
Well, they were.
Like what you'd see America is that, like, freedom of religion. And that's kind of why the Mayflower stopped there first, I think, was because they were a freedom of religion country. I don't know if I got my eras mixed up, but I know that,
Well,
the Mayflower went there first.
It's amazing. It's amazing what freedom does to improve people's lives. Because prior to the 17th century, they had been controlled really by Spain, and which seems kind of strange because they're quite a distance. There are countries between them and Spain, but the Spanish wanted more seacoast, I guess, and they controlled that whole area. The Dutch revolted. The Dutch were Protestant leaning, and Spain, of course, was Catholic, and so that was one bone of contention. And because Spain wasn't happy leaving the people to be Protestant, they wanted them to convert to Catholicism. So that was one bone of contention. Then the other one was that there was the Dutch East India Company, which was a shipping company, and that was a very important one. Well, because they were being controlled by the Spanish kept wanting to raise their taxes on everybody. And then on the Dutch East India Company, they were trying to take more of the profits, a bigger percentage of the profits, plus taxes. So there was a lot of resentment at that, as you can imagine. And
it sounds familiar.
They were, I hate to say the Dutch are revolting, because they're not.
Yes.
But that sounds bad. But they had skirmishes, and they had not exactly riots, but they had unrest, I'll say, for quite a long time. Finally, they actually started really fighting, and they fought really for 80 some years before the Spanish finally got tired of sending troops over there and decided that it wasn't worth it. So they then declared themselves a free colony. But this is what was so amazing, because they were the first country in Europe to be ruled by themselves, not by a monarchy, not by the Pope. They formed their own government, and it was a republic. And that gave them the freedom to make their own laws or regulations. And they didn't do too much in the way of regulation. They wanted their freedom, and what that freedom did was gave everybody the impetus to be the best they could be as prosperous as they could be. And this really worked, because the level of the standard of living went up in Holland. It was highest of any country in Europe.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, when you think about that, the Dutch East Indian Company, that was, drilled into our heads when, when I was in school in South Africa. And it was a
Yeah.
huge change. I mean, it changed the entire country with what happened.
Mhm.
And history wise, and there were, I go back to those patterns, and I know I always bring this up with you when we touch on the Dutch East India Company, the dishes that they would bring in and the patterns that were also put onto cloth, that blue and white, it's almost like stamping, and
Right.
these designs on plates, and
Well, the porcelain. You're
yeah,
talking
it was
about
all
yeah.
blue and white,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
um and you had little windmills and things like that on there, and
Mhm.
but then later it became part of textile art too. It's
Mhm.
just a huge part of South Africa is that blue and white.
Mhm.
Dutch East India Company, it had that stamp on there too. And you think about that, would never have happened in South Africa if it wasn't for them coming over, or that shipping company coming over. And I
Mhm.
mean, there was a whole fort built just because of them, for in the Cape. So it's just when you think about how a country can move into another one, it's pretty well, we're watching it right now with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, which is,
Right.
a sad situation. But I mean, way back when they're doing that on these ships, and these ships were blowing each other up.
Yeah.
It's that's some crazy stuff going on
Well,
there.
England at the time, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the Dutch were the guy like the first out of the gate really to really do commercial shipping, because that was their whole thing. They were trading, they were going to get spices and so forth. Other countries joined in. Other countries concentrated like on the upper coast of Africa, or some of the people went to South America. Some people went. Some countries went to Central America, and so the port and different. I mean, the object of all these people was to gain wealth. Period. So they weren't trying to improve the lives of the countries they went to necessarily.
No.
They want stuff to take back home and make their lives better. So it was not it was kind of selfish in a way, but I mean this was the time that we can't compare it to today. The Portuguese, for instance, specialized in slaves. And they took those slaves to Central and South America and Mexico.
Mhm.
Possibly they furnished some of the slaves for the southern United States. I'm not sure of that, but the Dutch they abided by the rule, kind of, or the philosophy that they tried to figure out what people wanted, and they would try to supply it. And people wanted spice, they wanted tea, they wanted coffee, which was new, and so they concentrated on those things. So the shipping was mostly controlled by the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch didn't really specialize in protection or armies or navies. They were interested in business, and so this is where they sort of ran into trouble as they got more successful. Other countries started getting jealous of them. England was jealous. France was jealous. Spain was jealous.
Mhm.
So they started to be at this time, England, which is, we sort of think England, it has this reputation as this, powerful navy, and this is when they started building their navy toward the end of the 17th century, and then they started interfering with the Dutch. So the Dutch were sort of trying to fend off the English, which had they had more ships that were military type ships, where the Dutch had very few of those kind of ships. Then France started bothering them again, and so they toward the very end of the 17th century, their shipping declined a little bit, just because there were more people, more countries involved, and it was every country was really really in a way the enemy of all the other countries. So they didn't get along very well.
It's
I think everybody was out for their own country,
Right.
you know, because, and I think, you know, if you think back when we're talking about, it's not like today, back then, how people survived was a lot harder than for how we are now.
Yeah.
So when you needed something, there are things that were really, really hard to get. And that shipping was one of the ways to get stuff. I mean, if you're really, when you think
Oh, yeah.
about some of the new colonies, most of their things like flour and all that had to come in by boat or by ship. All these people that spread out had to get some kind of way of feeding themselves, so before their own crops and manufacturing and everything could be built. So I
Right.
think everybody was like vying for the things they needed for survival and to move forward. So they, you know, it's kind of, the competition was pretty fierce.
Well, it was, and when you talk about getting things from
Yeah.
other places, I mean these were luxury items. I mean,
Yeah.
no doubt about it, and the Dutch standard of living was very high, so they started producing paintings, and they did paintings of the ships, but most of the people. The other thing that's really interesting, I think, is that this is the first time that the people who bought paintings were not the rulers and not the church, but in the ordinary people. And I think that's really important.
yeah.
Because the subject matter of the painting appealed to them. They wanted to show that they were living well. They were happy, happy living well. And so the paintings often, like it was the still life, that would have objects in there that might be imported. Fruit from other countries that didn't grow in Holland, oranges, for instance. They might have flowers, because if you're just eking out a living, you're going to be growing vegetables. You're not going to be growing flowers. But now they had the time to kind of specialize in things that they couldn't have before, or that weren't profitable, or so now they were profitable because people wanted a bouquet of flowers because it enriched their lives. So the subject matter of the paintings really changed because of shipping, because of those boats. And
That
No, I think that the pictures, paintings really tell history in a way that, I mean, people who write history, it's a difficult thing to do since you weren't there. So you're going, well, you weren't, but so you're reading other things, and you're going to museums, you're looking at paintings for sure. You're looking at artifacts from that era that you're talking about and trying to piece together a great big puzzle. Yeah, so I think when you were looking back at things, you can only really surmise, like, okay, if you got rid of everything that we have right now in your kitchen, and you visited a museum and you picked up, here's your pestle and mortar, go bake a cake. Can you imagine? I mean, really, when you think about it,
right.
Those people who moved on to different countries and settled countries, you have to take your hat off to them, man. That's brave.
Yeah.
yeah.
And hard. And the thing that records it really is, to me, the arts.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely easy to see when you look at Dutch painting.
Yeah.
And look at the painting that was done before they became a republic and compare it with the painting that was done after they were a republic, and you can really see it in a dramatic way.
I just love to hear when you this changeover from like the lords and the kings and the queens and the royalty,
Yeah.
they used to have all the paintings, and you'd have to be really, really rich. And mostly it was the royalty that was rich way back when. But
Right.
then it gets to that point where people start purchasing art, regular human beings purchasing art. That means a country's, flourishing, so it
Mhm.
was industrious. And I think we forget about them. I think that gets lost with the history of Spain always being there as big conquerors too, England. But I think that one piece of history about Dutch, we don't hear about it as much, unless we go there and go to Holland and Amsterdam. And
Well, that's true.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
we always, yeah, because they're smaller, but look how powerful and they were as such a small, country and region. It's they were smart too. They're
Mhm.
still smart. They're still smart. We've got friends in Holland and Amsterdam. Like, we're still smart. What are you talking about? We're, but and the arts, it's really interesting now with Europe opening up and watching a lot of travel writers, and we're doing some special features just on traveling Europe. And when they go to all these places where you learn how porcelain is getting painted, and you see these arts that come out of Dutch. I mean, even look at Dutch toll painting, and it goes more craft, but it's absolutely amazing what comes out of Holland in regards to art. It's incredible. So I think it's interesting about the ships. That just shows something like, okay, here we are, and we are prideful because we did this, we conquered.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
shipping is something we don't think about when we think about the culture of a country, but the two are intertwined. And certainly in this case, because they became wealthy enough, and their ruling system allowed them to prosper. I mean, everybody benefited, and the culture really blossomed.
Mm,
So I
that's
mean,
cool.
it is interesting
Mm.
when you compare it with the rest of Europe, especially.
And then you think about all the painters that came out of there too, you
Yeah,
know? You
right.
start thinking
Even
about all,
it's even we've got all these paintings of ships, and if you go online and look at Dutch ships, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of paintings that
Mhm.
were done by Dutch painters. And we know who those painters were because most of them were recorded.
mm,
But the thing is, they're not famous. And the famous paintings in during the Dutch 17th century are much they tended to paint for the people who had houses. And because you have to have, I mean, you're not going to really hang a lot of paintings in a ship, probably,
right.
but you can hang them in the houses. And so you see paintings of ships occasionally in homes. You see paintings of people's houses interiors because people were, and in some of these paintings of interiors, there are paintings shown in the paintings. So
Mm,
because they were proud of how they lived, and they were proud of what they had, and they were proud. I mean, you didn't see a lot of Oriental carpets in Holland before shipping brought them there. So and it was considered a definite luxury
that's
item.
exactly,
So
yeah, art is luxury, but then, you think about what is life without art.
yeah. Yeah. And sometimes there are a lot of paintings done during that time of people enjoying themselves and
Mm,
like having parties in other people's houses or in a tavern. They would put everybody in there, like including kids and dogs, and everybody is kind of rowdy. But
Mm.
this is what the people wanted, and there were lots of painters who did these paintings, and they are more well known than the artists who painted the ships.
It's interesting because even like, well, the Dutch, a lot of them lived in Copenhagen. They
mhm.
migrated there, and as you enter the one harbor in Copenhagen, there's a sculpture of a Little Mermaid, the Little Mermaid, not
Yes.
Walt Disney's Little Mermaid.
Right.
But I mean, and that meant something to the people there. you know, that's like one of their biggest attractions now is if you
Yes.
go there that you have to go see the mermaid. There's this whole story behind it that the mermaid is that sculpture's there because the mermaid saved the life of a shipwrecked prince. And then she has to give up her tail and become a human to get wedded to him and all sorts of things like that. I mean, it's I know it's a myth, but somebody took the time to make that beautiful sculpture in that harbor,
Yes.
Mhm.
you know, and I'm sure the city paid for it, you know, because they wanted a piece of art to greet people as a hello, welcome sign.
Right.
And I think that's what art does. Besides telling us history and educating, it's also used to welcome people.
Well,
Yeah.
now we're getting into public art now. Here we go.
Well,
There we go. One- That's, you know, and speaking of public art, I mean, most pieces of public art way back when were commissioned by one person. And so we call it public art now because that's where it is usually. But
mhm.
it was usually the project or the gift of one individual. Now we have a lot of public art that is decided on by committee,
Hmm.
and it'll be interesting to see, you know, what stands the test of time.
Mm. Going back also, like, the mermaid, sculpture, and, that relates to shipping, right? And so you have these other artists that were painting other things like flowers and things like that, and fruit, and,
Mhm.
but at the same time, all of that being purchased for people in their homes and people getting more affluent, it really came from the country being better, not just from the more political freedom and religious freedom and all of that, but isn't it really stem from what the Dutch East India Company did, having that shipping, those ships. So it's really, you've got to think, I mean, they had to bomb off people, like, get off my ship, this is my stuff on my
Bomb
ship,
'em
get
off.
off. Yeah, they shot cannons and stuff. I mean, and people used
Yeah,
to
at each
jump on
other.
each other's ships and steal stuff. I mean,
Pirates
it,
and
it's
oh my.
crazy what they
Yeah.
did. And you've got to think about, it wasn't the nicest conditions. So, it's kind of a respect to those who were out there risking their lives to take goods from one place to the other and to settle in places. So I
Right.
think they really, art really came from what happened on those ships, not just in painting, but what went down,
Sure.
literally.
Well, and when you think
Sure.
about
Yeah, there was a lot
the-
of skirmishes. I mean, when things
Yeah.
when they started getting a little too prosperous, and there was all this envy with other countries, and there was a lot of skirmishes, and people did fight. They fired cannons at each other. I'm sure ships were sunk and people drowned.
Mhm.
But they considered it worth it.
Hmm.
Can you imagine like going to war?
And the other thing is, I mean, can you imagine in one of those little ships, which they really weren't that large, 100 feet to maybe, I think, 250 feet long, sometimes three decks high, that the weather was probably a daily concern to them. I mean, they knew where they were going because everything had been charted at that time where they were going. But just the weather, I was totally without, they couldn't control that. And those ships must have been pretty scary to be on, in tremendous storm.
Well, especially if you line up ships against each other in a harbor and decide to throw cannons at each other,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, steady the sails and go bomb the other person while they're bombing you, and you're all sitting in the same harbor. It's like, okay, how smart is that?
Well,
it
does not seem very smart.
doesn't at all, does it today? But maybe they thought they could make a fast getaway. I don't know. But you're in those ships and it's not like they got motors.
That's true.
You know, yeah.
You're
So
all-
it's like
They're all using the same wind.
I know. So it's like you're no matter what, you're all gonna run in the same direction
Yeah.
unless you have a bunch of rowers. I mean, which would probably be slaves back then.
No, they didn't have those.
They didn't have those.
No. No.
That's nice.
So,
Wow.
well, anyway, my
Yeah.
hat is off to the Dutch.
Well, I'm
Mm.
glad they didn't use slaves then. That's, compared to others, and it just also a different time of the world, Everyone, you can read Victoria's article about this up on blendradioandtv.com, and there's some pictures of Dutch ships and painted Dutch ships. And of course, keep up with Victoria. Go to victoriachick.com. She's on every third Saturday. We talk about art history. We've got lots of good conversations coming up. So stay tuned. Thanks so much, Victoria. It's always fun.
Thanks, Lisa. See you next month.